Have you ever wondered what actually happened inside the USS Thresher in the 2 minutes before it vanished? Not the version everyone's heard for 60 years, the real one. Because for 6 decades, the official story of America's worst submarine disaster sat behind a wall of classification so thick that entire generations of Thresher families died without knowing what really happened to the men they lost. And when the wall finally came down, it revealed something, just maybe not what anyone was expecting. On the morning of April 10th, 1963, the USS Thresher, the lead ship of the fastest, deepest diving class of submarine the US Navy had ever built, was conducting a routine deep dive test roughly 220 miles off Cape Cod. She was fresh out of a 9-month overhaul at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. On the surface, the submarine rescue ship USS Skylark tracked her by underwater telephone as she descended toward her test depth of 1,300 feet. Aboard were 129 men, 16 officers, 96 enlisted sailors, and 17 civilian shipyard technicians riding along to monitor the very systems that had just been overhauled. The commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey, 35 years old, one of the most respected submariners in the fleet. At 9:12 in the morning, Skylark received a garbled transmission, something about minor difficulties, a positive up angle, attempting to blow. Then at 9:17, Skylark's sonar picked up a sound no submariner ever wants to hear, compartments collapsing under pressure. Then silence. The Thresher was gone. By that afternoon, debris was found floating on the surface. Bits of cork insulation, rubber gloves, fragments of yellow-jacketed pipe. There was no rescue attempt because there was nothing left to rescue. It remains the deadliest submarine disaster in US history, and for a long time it was also one of the most secretive. Here's what most people know. A court of inquiry was convened within weeks. Officers, engineers, and shipyard workers testified. The Navy released a summary blaming a probable flooding casualty, likely from a failed pipe joint that triggered an electrical failure, shut down the reactor, and left the crew unable to blow the ballast tanks in time to arrest their descent before the hull exceeded crush depth. That was the official word. And for the families of the 129 men who died that morning, that was almost all they ever got. The full transcripts of the court of inquiry, the technical assessments, the internal Navy communications, all of it stayed classified. Not for 5 years, not for 20, for decades. And when a government keeps something classified for that long, people start filling in the silence themselves. Rumours grew. Some suspected a design flaw the Navy didn't want to admit to. Some suspected corners had been cut during construction to keep pace with the Soviets. Some suspected an outright cover-up, that somewhere in those sealed pages was proof the Navy knew the ship was unsafe and sent her down anyway. For 60 years, nobody outside a small circle of officials actually knew which of those theories, if any, were true. The families of the dead grew old and in many cases passed away still waiting for an answer. The person who finally forced the issue was a man named James Bryant, a retired Navy captain who had commanded 3 different Thresher-class submarines over the course of his own career. Bryant wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a career submariner who believed the classification had gone on for so long that it had stopped serving any real purpose and had started serving only the Navy's own comfort. In 2019, Bryant sued the federal government under the Freedom of Information Act to force the release of the Thresher inquiry files. In February 2020, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. agreed with him and ordered roughly 3,600 pages of documents declassified. Since then, the Navy has been releasing them in rolling batches, a few hundred pages at a time, some still redacted, some still trickling out even now. For the first time since 1963, the public could finally read what investigators actually found, in the investigators' own words. So what was in there? Here is where the story gets interesting, because the answer isn't the cover-up so many people expected. According to Bryant himself and the other experts who've combed through the released pages, the documents show something almost more unsettling than a conspiracy. They show that there wasn't one single catastrophic failure at all. There was a chain of smaller ones, each one survivable on its own, that lined up in exactly the wrong order on exactly the wrong morning. It starts with the dive itself. The Thresher had undergone shock trials, controlled explosive tests designed to simulate combat damage, months earlier, and some of her piping had never been fully re-inspected afterward for hairline leaks. On the morning of the disaster, she descended toward test depth faster than later safety doctrine would ever allow, without pausing periodically to check for exactly that kind of seepage. Then there was the overhaul itself. During the 9 months at Portsmouth, valves throughout the engine room had been relocated, standard practice during a refit. But it meant the crew was operating a slightly unfamiliar version of a boat they thought they knew by heart. In an emergency, when men have to find the right valve in the dark in seconds by feel, that kind of change matters enormously. Then, according to the acoustic and electrical data in the released files, at around 9:11 in the morning, an electrical bus feeding the main coolant pumps failed. The pumps tripped off. Without coolant flow, the reactor had to be shut down automatically, and without the reactor, the Thresher lost propulsion entirely. She was now dead in the water, sinking at depth, with no way to drive herself back to the surface. That left one option: blow the ballast tanks with high-pressure air and force the water out by brute force. And this is the piece of the story that should make anyone's blood run cold. The air flasks used for the emergency blow had strainers designed to filter out moisture. At the pressures and temperatures found at depth, some of that moisture froze. Ice formed in the lines. The high-pressure air that was supposed to violently force water out of the ballast tanks and rocket the Thresher back toward daylight barely trickled through, if it moved at all. One of the declassified messages actually includes the phrase 900 north, which experts now believe meant the Thresher had already sunk 900 feet below her test depth of 1,300 feet and was still going down. By 9:17, she'd gone far enough. The hull gave way all at once. A Navy acoustic analyst who later re-examined the sonar data placed the actual moment of implosion at roughly 2,400 feet, hundreds of feet deeper than anyone originally assumed, in well under 2 minutes from that first garbled message. So is that better or worse than a cover-up? In some ways it might be worse. There was no single villain, no single ignored memo, no a moment where somebody could have simply said no and saved 129 lives. It was smaller than that. A training gap here, a test skip there, an icing problem nobody had fully accounted for, compounding, in real time, 1,300 feet under the Atlantic, with no way out. And crucially, the experts who have reviewed the declassified files, including Bryant himself, the man who fought for 6 years to get them released, have said plainly that they found no evidence of an intentional cover-up. The Navy kept the files classified for so long, primarily to protect operational details about submarine depths, construction, and rescue capabilities from the Soviet Union during the Cold War, not to hide wrongdoing. That's not a satisfying answer for anyone hoping for a villain, but it does appear to be the true one. The wreck itself was located just over a year later, in the summer of 1964, by the survey ship USNS Mizar and the deep-diving bathyscaphe Trieste II. They found the Thresher scattered across the ocean floor in 6 major sections, spread across a debris field nearly 33 acres wide, resting at a depth of around 8,500 feet. The wreckage confirmed exactly what the sound had suggested a year earlier. The hull hadn't cracked or torn, it had been crushed all at once by the sheer weight of the ocean above it. And here's where the second part of this story comes in, because the Thresher disaster did produce something concrete out of all that horror. In the aftermath, the Navy created a program called SubSafe, a rigorous, uncompromising set of standards for how every single system on a submarine that could be exposed to seawater at depth has to be designed, tested, documented, and certified before that submarine is ever allowed to dive again. Every weld, every joint, every valve traceable on paper, back to the exact material and the exact inspection that approved it. It sounds almost bureaucratic until you look at the result. Since SubSafe was implemented in the mid-1960s, not a single SubSafe certified American submarine has ever been lost. The only submarine the US Navy has lost since Thresher was the USS Scorpion in 1968, and she was never SubSafe certified in the first place. 6 decades of deep dives, and the program born directly out of the worst submarine disaster in American history has held every single time since. The Thresher herself was never raised, and under Navy tradition she's still technically on patrol. Every submarine's patrol begins the moment it leaves port, and doesn't officially end until it returns. The Thresher left Portsmouth on April 9, 1963, and she has never come back. She's still down there today, 8,500 feet beneath the Atlantic, scattered across the seafloor, still monitored annually by the Navy to make sure her reactor has never leaked into the surrounding water. It hasn't. 60 years of declassified documents later, we finally know, as closely as we're ever going to, exactly what went wrong that morning. Not a conspiracy. Not a single culprit. Just a string of small survivable failures that on one particular Wednesday morning weren't survivable at all. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep making more of these. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you next time.